Great to have you with us as we broadcast live from Humana, 1000 North Green Valley Parkway, Suite 720 here in the shopping center that's on the southeast corner of Pebble and Green Valley Parkway. It's a stand down, and that means we're asking people to bring gently used or brand new clothes. And as Dixon said a moment ago, if it's underwear or socks, please make sure they're brand new and in the container because, well, I don't even want to think about it otherwise. I mean, that's the thing to do. Okay. And also, if you're not on this side of town, there's always 8975 West Charleston at Fort Apache, right behind the Claim Jumper. So either way, it's all for the vets. It's all it goes for the vets. I am so thrilled to have with me here at the Humana Studios, our makeshift studios, if it were, Stephen Emerson. He's one of the leading authorities on Islamic extremist networks, financing and operations, serves as the executive director of the Investigative Project on Terrorism, and has made many, many appearances before Congress, U.S. government, and congressional committees. And you've done a lot of study on this. Stephen, may I call you Stephen?
I've been called worse.
I appreciate your stopping by. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Good to have you here. How serious, as my first logical question is, how serious today, seriously, is the threat in the United States by terrorists? I mean, you hear all kinds of things back and forth. How serious is the threat today?
Well, there is a serious threat. Since 9/11, there have been 114 attempted or successful attacks in the United States. 3 were successful, one at Fort Hood, the one at Little Rock, and one at LAX in 2002. The other ones have all fortunately been stopped by law enforcement. Some of them could have carried out, had they been successful, been enormously, had enormous casualties. The rate of which we are experiencing, quote, lone wolves, those that are not acting
like Fort Hood.
Fort Hood, right? Those that are not acting under the orders of Al-Qaeda is increasing by 100% every year. And unfortunately, the situation, and this I get into in a documentary that I'm releasing in a month. It's called Jihad in America 2, The Grand Deception, and it's about the stealth jihad. And just briefly, what I mean by that, it's about how radical Islamic groups, mostly of Muslim Brotherhood origin, have masqueraded themselves as civil rights groups and penetrated law enforcement, the media, Congress, Hollywood, the publishing industry, under the pretense that they're protecting the civil rights of Muslims. But in fact, they really promoting the agenda of the Muslim Brotherhood, which believes in the imposition of a global Islamic caliphate.
Is the American government aware of this? I mean, it sounds naive to ask this, but is the government aware of this?
When you say the government is very big. Many agencies.
The president and the Congress, the Senate.
There are people. Well, let's just say this: there are many agents I deal with in the FBI or AUSAs, Assistant U.S. Attorneys around the country, that are fully aware of this. They do prosecutions, but at the top levels of DOJ, in the last couple of years, and I say this not as a Republican or as a Democrat, there has been a deliberate effort to legitimize radical Islamic groups who espouse behind closed doors, and we know that because my group infiltrates them, who call for death to Israel, death to Jews, who claim there's a war against Islam, which incites people to carry out terrorism. These very groups are being legitimized and welcomed into the highest levels of the Department of Justice, the White House, and the Department of State.
All right, I've got to ask you the obvious question, if you don't mind. Why?
That's a good question. I can't get into the mind of the president.
I understand.
Okay, but I will tell you this: my conclusion is, and people debate whether he's a Muslim. That's not an issue for me.
Okay.
I think he ideologically is pro-Islamist, not pro-Muslim. I make a distinction here.
Okay.
Islamist is a political ideology based on the religious belief that Islam has to reign supreme. Islam is separate. So I'm talking about Islamism. It's the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood now, which is taking over Egypt,
right,
which is the mother of all terrorist groups around the world, Islamic terrorist groups, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, and everything. They're in 70 countries. In New York today, right, there's a controversy over NYPD doing surveillance over the Muslim student associations who claim they're choir boys. The Muslim student associations were created in 1963 as the beachhead for the Muslim Brotherhood in the U.S. under false cover, and they had been in leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood, of the MSAs, Muslim Student Associations, 600 of which have chapters on U.S. colleges, have been involved in terrorism, have been involved in fundraising for terrorism, and have had actual leaders of MSAs like Anwar al-Awlaki, the guy who was assassinated in Yemen,
right,
as presidents. And we have in our upcoming documentary undercover video from different MSAs around the country, which you would not believe what goes on behind closed doors. So the New York Police Department was doing the right thing. And now, unfortunately, the Associated Press, which is in bed with the left-wing media, is attacking them for, quote, violating the civil rights of Muslim groups. And this is the mantra of these organizations. They hide under the notion that they're the victims, that they masquerade as civil rights. It would be like David Duke coming on your show and saying, I'm a civil rights leader.
Right.
It would be rejected, right? They're no different. But in fact, the difference is their deception has been accepted by the president, by the Attorney General Holder.
And by the mainstream media.
And by the mainstream media, yes. And by Hollywood. Look, Hollywood,
yeah.
There is no film today, and hasn't been for the last 4 years, any major studio has done a film that features an Islamic terrorist as a protagonist. You know why? Because all scripts are now vetted by a radical Islamic group in Hollywood.
The new TV show that is out, GCB, refers to, it's on at 10 o'clock on Sunday nights. I have not watched it, but it refers to good, I think, Christian, and then the B word. So they call it GCB. Even Newt Gingrich attacked that and said, you know, it's anti-Christian because had they never would have come out and put substitute Muslim for Christian. They never would have said good Muslim.
You know, the term radical Islam,
yeah,
has never been uttered, and it's been prohibited from being used by President Obama under an executive order. So DHS, Department of Justice, FBI are not allowed to even use that term. You can use the term Japanese Yakuza, you can use the term Italian Mafia, Colombian cartels, black gangs, but you can't use the term radical Muslim. And if you can't define your enemy, you can't beat them. And that's a political correctness that is going to kill us.
You're scaring the hell out of me. 257 KDWN, 257-5396. If you want to talk to one of the foremost authorities on terrorism and especially on Muslim, radical Islamic Muslim terrorism, and that's what we're talking about. And I know, again, it's not politically correct, but this information has got to get out. Obviously, talk radio deals with this, and there are other aspects of the media. Fox News also obviously talks about it, but you do have so much of the media ignoring this.
Not just ignoring it. The New York Times, for example, and I know this because we've infiltrated several, I won't say the groups, several radical Islamic groups that masquerade as civil rights groups, but in fact were created by Hamas. I see internal emails between them and New York Times reporters or CNN reporters in which they tell the reporters what to write, and then I end up seeing the reports in the newspapers or in the media verbatim, exactly the way these radicals tell them to do. So in the end, it's a collusion that is so devilish, and it happens not just in the media, but at the university level as well, at the student level and at the academic level.
How do we fight this then? I mean, I'm talking about, you're talking about now, and obviously you're going to be you're here for a few days to talk about it. I'm going to have you on my TV show tomorrow. We'll talk about it more. But how do we get this out to the general public nationally?
You raise a good question. Look, I operate a nonprofit group. And I'm allowed to do things that the FBI can't do because the FBI can only investigate if there's a criminal predicate. They can't just walk into a mosque and say, we're going to do a fishing expedition. Listen, they can only do if they're looking at somebody because of a criminal investigation. I, however, as a U.S. citizen, a former journalist or a recovering journalist, the only thing I really believe in the media are the sports scores, I can tell you that we have 40,000 hours of undercover video and audio. 6 million documents. So we work a lot in infiltrating these groups. Now, getting it out is you ask the core question: how do you get it out? One is the reality is that as Winston Churchill once said, democracies act when there's blood in the streets. So after 9/11, people understood, but now we're in a pre-9/11 mentality. And now under this administration, and again, I say this not as somebody who's a Democrat or Republican, but as somebody who has sources, because I've been living in Washington for 25 years, I have key sources all over in national security. The damage that is being done to our national security because of the legitimization of radical Islamic groups in L.A., by the LAPD, by the Department of Justice, by the FBI. The FBI now has banned any speaker on Islam who is considered to be offensive to radical Islamic groups. Nobody even knows that.
The FBI has banned them?
Yep.
But you're working with the FBI, though.
I'm working with FBI agents, but I, who have worked, and I can tell you this, we've worked on, our organization does overt work and covert work. The covert work involves working with prosecutions, indictments, developing intelligence, agents around the country, 115 prosecutions since 9/11. I've given 141 speeches gratis to FBI bureaus around the country. I have now been banned from talking to FBI offices around the country, okay? And you know who can speak to them? Radical Islamic groups. This is amazing. The CIA had me scheduled to speak in August as the keynote speaker at a counterterrorism conference on the history of radical Islam in the U.S.
I remember.
The day before I was banned. You know why? The White House was contacted by a radical Islamic group called CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, which is a Hamas front and designated so by the FBI, contacted John Brennan, the president's advisor, who then contacted Panetta, and he killed the conference.
Wow, you're listening to this Truth right here on News Talk 720 KDW, and I'm talking to Stephen Emerson, one of the foremost authorities on extremism and Islamic terrorism, and I know he's been shut out from talking about this in some circles, not here at News Talk 720. And you know what? I'm going to open the lines up to you in a moment. At 257 KDWN 257-5396. Broadcasting live today from Humana, 1000 North Green Valley Parkway and Suite 720. This is the shopping center in the southeast corner of Pebble and Green Valley Parkway. It's part of the stand down to bring as many new clothes or gently used clothes here for veterans. And if you don't want to come by here, you're on the other side of town, no problem. 8975 West Charleston at Fort Apache, either one. And I've got a line open at 257 KDWN 257-5396. Talking to Stephen Emerson, I thank Elliot Carpin, the Federation, for having brought Stephen here for us, and I really do thank them. And I thank you for being here as well. Stephen Emerson is one of the foremost leading authorities on Islamist extremism and terrorism in general. And first of all, I want to ask you, before I get into anything else, you said you're coming up with a documentary. What's the name, and when's it going to be released? The
documentary is called Jihad in America 2, The Grand Deception. Why it's called 2 is because the last film I did, one of the last films I did was called Jihad in America 1, aired in 1994 on public television. It was about 7 years ahead of its time. Because it talked about all of the radical Islamic groups in the United States, including the USF professor, Sami al-Arian, who was then head of the Islamic Jihad but pretended to be, just a humanitarian professor of engineering,
right.
Ultimately convicted. In fact, everybody in that 94 film was ultimately convicted or deported or sent to jail, every single one of them.
Wow.
So the new film is called The Grand Deception because it's really about the stealth jihad. It's how these groups have penetrated our systems here in what I call a legal insurgency. It's not illegal for these groups to lie, fabricate, masquerade, and penetrate. And I've seen it because we have infiltration. Our group has successfully infiltrated radical groups, and we see on the inside what they've done.
When is this going to be?
The film is going to be released officially in May. We're going to take it around the country. We don't yet know if any major network will air it. We think we're going to have a couple of pieces aired on Fox. We're still dealing with some other networks. But, of course, you can imagine the, quote, radical Islamic groups. And I want to make a very big distinction here. There are mainstream groups, and in our film, half of the people interviewed are courageous Muslim moderates. So I don't say that all Muslims are terrorists. Far from it. It's the radicals I'm talking about. And the radicals want to erase any distinction between mainstream Islam and radicals, so they can say that if you criticize radical Islam, you're a bigot. And
right.
That type of intimidation causes people to be afraid to speak out. So the film is going to be released in May. It's 70 minutes long. If people want to first of all, go to our website. I have to make a plug.
Which is what?
It's www.investigativeproject, one word, investigativeproject.org, and they can sign up for our emails and also see the alerts and trailers for the film.
All right. I can tell. I hope you'll be bringing it to Las Vegas. I'll make a point of making sure that I get people to sponsor it out here.
That'd be great.
We will absolutely make a point of doing that.
Definitely.
The invitation's already open.
Perfect.
At this point. Absolutely. I'm sure Elliot will work with me on that one, but I know I will make sure that this absolutely happens. You know, I want to bring up a couple of other things. First of all, you mentioned mainstream media, and you mentioned the Congress and everything else. What else scares me and concerns me is a lot of the schools, especially the colleges. Just about a week and a half ago, matter of fact, the same day as Barack Obama was addressing the AIPAC conference, same day, there was a gathering at Harvard where anti-Israeli activists gathered and were told that, in fact, the Jewish people do not even exist. There is no such thing. Professor Susan M. Akram of Boston University School of Law told the gathering that there is no legal basis for Jewish self-determination at all, claiming that Israel's claim of a state on the basis of exclusive and discriminatory rights to Jews has never been juridically recognized. That was her word. In other words, the concept of the Jewish people as a national entity with extraterritorial claims has never been recognized under international law. And she was not only allowed to say it, she was never challenged on that. And
moreover, Harvard didn't have to allow Harvard allowed it to be sponsored by the university. There's no First Amendment right that gives these groups the right to have the university sponsor these or allow it to have it on campus. But what's happening in California, and also, as you saw in Harvard and elsewhere, you see universities increasingly getting into bed or allowing radical Islamic groups or anti-Semitic groups or anti-American groups viciously calling, abject anti-Semitism or even calling for violence. And it's in the film. You'll see at UCLA and elsewhere where they get into bed. Actually, at UC Berkeley, there's actually a department that was created with Hamas. It's an official academic department on, quote, racism, and it's sponsored by Hamas front groups called CARE. And it's unbelievable because...
What's the department? Do you know offhand?
I don't remember offhand, but it's prevalent around the country. Andy McCarthy, a good friend of mine, used to be a U.S. prosecutor in New York on terrorism, now writes for NRO, wrote a great book called The Grand Jihad and about the devilish alliance between the ultra-left and the jihadists on campuses around the country. And it's very dangerous because in the next 20 years, the next generation are going to be the lawyers, the journalists, the writers. Right. They're the ones believing this stuff and promoting it.
You know, during the break, one of the folks here, JD's here, is one of our listeners, and he was talking to you about the black Muslims and about Louis Farrakhan in particular. And also, it was just about a week ago, within the last week, that Louis Farrakhan was asked to speak at Berkeley, as a matter of fact, and was vicious in his condemnation of not only Jews, but he said, I don't have the exact quote from me, but he did say that blacks and Jews should not be talking to each other.
Well, you know, listen, here's one of the quandaries we face. Free speech allows someone to get up and say, death to America. Free speech, you know, we have great free speech laws. There's no hate free speech. Canada is different, where if you say death to America or death to Canada, you can be actually arrested. Here we don't have that, and I support that.
Okay? I'm with you.
Okay, so on campuses, which are basically the institutions, the epitomes of free speech, you know, push it to the envelope. But where they go over the envelope is like at Irvine. Remember where they interrupted the Israeli ambassador?
It's about 2-3 years ago. Exactly.
Last year, actually.
All right.
And they got convicted. Irvine 11. Okay. They claimed it was just free speech. It wasn't just free speech. They denied the free speech of the speaker.
Correct.
And then they claimed that their convictions was racism and an attack on Islam. So they contend. In fact, most of these Islamic groups, even here in Las Vegas, in L.A., New York, whatever, portray every conviction of an Islamic terrorist as racist or fabricated by the FBI. And despite that, the FBI and the Department of Justice engage them, legitimize them, and even have them speak at counterterrorism conferences.
You know, you said something at the very beginning that scared me. By the way, I'm talking with Stephen Emerson, a foremost authority on terrorism and Islamic extremism. And if you want to join in 257-KDWN, 257-5396. At the very beginning, you said something else that concerned me, and that is about individuals, lone lone people doing things on their own. You mentioned Fort Hood, and there were a couple of other places as well. Concern to me is that how do you know? I mean, how do you stop things like this happening? You said it's increasing by 100% every year. That was the figure you used. How do you stop something like this from happening if you don't know it? I mean, some people are. It's the John Hinckley mentality. You remember, who tried to kill President Reagan? I'm just going to become famous somehow and get the attention of people. He wanted to get Jodie Foster's attention. Other people want to get the attention of other folks, and they do this on their own. How do you stop it?
Well, that's why intelligence gathering and precursors, in other words, watching social media, watching people who make statements, okay, on Facebook or whatever, is very helpful, because if they're saying, I want to destroy America, that gives you a criminal predicate to basically start an investigation. How they stop half of these people is because of use of social media, like the NYPD. If you prohibit the intelligence gathering or the use of informants have been critical, and yet these groups have condemned informants as basically instigating terrorist plots. They want to stop informants. That's the key to intelligence gathering.
I'm talking with Stephen Emerson, and we're broadcasting live from Humana, 1000 North Green Valley Parkway at Suite 720, just like News Talk 720. Stephen Emerson, one of the foremost authorities on terrorism and Islamic extremism, and we're going to continue in just a moment. 257 KDWN 257-5396. I'm Alan Stockton. This is News Talk 720 KDWN. It's KDAWN. Great to have you with us on this Wednesday morning as we broadcast live from the Humana makeshift studios at 1000 North Green Valley Parkway, Suite 720. This is all part of the stand down to be able to bring clothes, new and gently used clothes. If you're bringing underwear and socks, bring them new and in the package, because all of this stuff goes to the veterans, and that's what it's all about. If you can't make it to this side of the valley, 8975 West Charleston at Fort Apache, another Humana place, and you can drop stuff off over there. I am really privileged to have Stephen Emerson with me here at Humana. Stephen Emerson, a foremost authority on the terrorism and Islamic extremism, and it is great to have you here. One of the questions that was asked, and I want to get this out because I think it's a legitimate question, JD was asking during the break, and that is about Louis Farrakhan, and because I mentioned his speech up at Berserkly when he made statements that blacks should not talk with Jews. Jews and blacks should not talk. A black Jew, of course, wouldn't be able to say anything to himself, so obviously that might be a problem. But I'm just, how dangerous is Louis Farrakhan and are the black Muslims today?
Well, let's make a distinction. Farrakhan used to have lots of followers, as many as 300,000, and today maybe only 25,000. He's been really marginalized, and he's not really considered a threat anymore. He's been largely defanged. What has happened is
but the media covers it every time he says anything.
Well, of course, he loves it, you know. But the reality is that the real threat comes from those that don't speak, the black Muslim converts in prisons, like in Riverside, California, where they plotted to blow up the synagogues in Beverly Hills and the National Guard Center, right? Or in LA, or New York, in Newburgh, California. That's where the things that are happening with black Muslim converts. It's not only, there's some white Muslim converts as well, like the Boyds in North Carolina, but primarily you see this in black Muslim converts in prison in New York State, in California, and elsewhere. The problem is the wardens and the prisons don't really care because the converts are peaceful in the prisons. It's what they do afterwards. If they get indoctrinated, that's the problem. So there's nobody watching them in the prisons. That's what number one. Number two, increasingly, black Muslims, which account for actually 35% of all Muslims in the United States, really are not in the leadership of the radical Islamic community. It's the Muslim Brotherhood groups that are basically, white, light, that are in control. In fact, there's a lot of racism against black, darker Muslims in the Sudan or in Egypt and elsewhere. There's a lot of, even in Detroit, there's a lot of racism against blacks by lighter Muslims.
Let me ask you something. I'm talking with Stephen Emerson. Do you have the ear of people on intelligence committees in Congress? Do you have the ear of Senator Harry Reid, who's the most powerful senator, and he's a Democrat, as well as I'm sure some Republicans listen to you. But and we're not making this a Democrat or Republican issue. It's an American issue. We ought to all be concerned about it. But I want to know. Are people like Harry Reid listening to you? Have you sat and talked with him?
I have not spoken to Harry Reid. I do have several very good relationships with other members of Congress, especially some chairmen of key committees or those of appropriations that control the funding of agencies. But there's a limitation. And number two, I can tell you, without mentioning names, that I have recordings, secret recordings, of radical Islamic groups discussing their meetings with key members of Congress, 99% of whom are all Democrat, including Harry Reid.
Wow. Let me ask you something else. I mean, because you mentioned this during the break, and I'm going to say right on out there, a lot of times liberal Jews can be our own worst enemies. I'm Jewish, and I'm, again, to the right of Genghis Khan. I told you that, and proudly so. But, I'm concerned about people like Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein. If there are liberal Jews in
Barney Frank.
Barney Frank, right.
I mean, look, it's not just in Congress. It's in L.A., I mean, it's in Hollywood, right?
Right.
The people that really stand up for Israel or stand up for the right are people like John Voight, Gary Sinise,
correct,
Willis. They're not Jewish, okay? The last Jewish person who stood up was Ron Silver, who died, unfortunately, of cancer.
Right.
But otherwise, you don't see that. So you see a liberal rabbi, the Reform movement, for example, is so much in bed with the radical Islamic groups that it sickens you. It would be like 1939, unfortunately, to see Jewish groups in bed with Nazi organizations. Now, I don't want to call Muslim Brotherhood groups Nazi groups, but in fact, remember, there was a whole brigade of Muslim Brotherhood members recruited by Adolf Hitler to fight against the Jews. Okay? Having said that, the reality is that liberal Jews end up supporting organizations financially, politically, and legitimization of organizations that would kill them, slit their throats. It's first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people.
So I'm going to ask you, I mean, I have my own ideas to the answer to my question, but I want to ask you this. Why do you think that that's the case? I go to an Orthodox synagogue, by the way, where I would say probably 95% of the people are conservative, politically speaking. And the more Orthodox people seem to be religiously, the more conservative, generally speaking. It's a generalization that they happen to be. And you're right. The more Reform or conservative, which today is more like Reform, that Jews happen to be, that they tend to be more politically liberal. Why do you think that is? You know,
you raise a good question, and I don't have an answer for you because I meet with congressmen who say, I support Israel. You know, and then they say, why do I get attacked by Jews? And I don't have an answer for them. And frankly, you know, the reality is that the people that stand up most for Israel or stand up most for American values against the radical Islamic organizations are not Jews.
Or at least not liberal Jews.
They're not liberal Jews. I mean, no. Look.
But liberals in general make excuses. Jews and non-Jews make excuses oftentimes for these. You know, you talked a moment ago about it was interesting, and it's absolutely true. The same's true in Hollywood when you talk about people who are supportive of radical Muslims, and yet they're gay, and yet the Muslims' big credo is to kill gays.
Or that they believe in ACLU. Founded on the principle that against the imposition of blasphemy laws in the U.S.
Right.
What has happened in the last 10 years? They've appointed 20% of their new members, of their new officials, from radical Islamic groups who propose and believe in blasphemy laws.
Right.
I mean, this is amazing to see.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? Yeah.
Okay. In the New York Times is totally in bed with radical. I mean, they have had articles on the Muslim Brotherhood that portray them as if they're Hadassah or the Rotary Club.
Right.
The Muslim Brotherhood is one of the most fascist organizations in the world today, okay? And the reality is they engage in deception. It's very easy to see through what they say behind closed doors, but they don't want to see this. So this liberal leftist alliance with the Muslim Brotherhood and the radical Islamists is really, it's a terrible problem on campuses. It's a terrible problem in the media. It's a terrible problem in Hollywood. Even in the publishing industry, there are books that have been burned. I mean, Random House burned 10,000 copies of a book because it was afraid that it might alienate Muslims. Random House. So when you see, remember the Danish cartoons episode?
Right.
Okay. In Europe, newspapers across Europe republish those cartoons in sympathy with the Danish cartoonists, right?
And there were fatwas put out on some of those people.
Right. But in the U.S., only 2 out of 300 newspapers republish them. Even the book by Yale University Press about the Danish cartoons refuses to publish the cartoons. Okay, and South Park cartoon, TV show, right, has been censored because they had a potential stick figure of Prophet Muhammad.
Right, I remember that.
Okay, I mean, we accept these limitations of free speech now as normal. Remember this issue 2 weeks ago? A judge in Pennsylvania ruled there was a parade where there was an atheist dressed up as zombie Muhammad. A Muslim saw him and attacked him physically. The Muslim was arrested, charged with battery and assault. Okay? Correct. The judge dismissed the charge and dressed down the victim and said, "You are not allowed to alienate or to insult Muslims because this is not free speech." This is Sharia law coming to the United States.
Incredible. You have you have an energy that reminds me of a friend of mine who just passed away, Andrew Breitbart.
Oh, Andrew is wonderful. Andrew is just I don't come near what he had, the energy. I wish I did. I mean, guy had ideas a mile a minute. He wasn't afraid to do anything, and he really helped change this country.
But you also are very outspoken, and you got a lot of guts to say what you say, and people got to hear what you have to say, and I will make sure that people definitely hear it, and not only on my radio show, my TV show, but by also bringing the video that you've put together, the movie that you put together, make sure that is shown in this area also. In a moment, I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in the Middle East right now with the so-called Arab Spring and everything else. Well, first thing we're going to do is I want to head on over to Mitch Kelly, though, and the CADON, One Nevada Credit Union Traffic Center, One Nevada Credit. I've got Stephen Emerson with me. We're broadcasting live from Humana, by the way, 1000 North Green Valley Parkway, Suite 720. That's in the shopping center. That's in the southeast corner of Pebble and Green Valley Parkway. This is part of the stand down. Please come on by and bring some gently used clothes or new clothes for the veterans. If you can't make it to this side of the valley, there's always 8975 West Charleston at Fort Apache, right behind Claim Jumper. So please, it's all for the vets. It's not for Humana. It's not for CADON. It's for the vets. Once again, I do want to thank Elliot Karp and the Federation for making sure that I got the chance to talk to you, Stephen Emerson. It's good having you here, saying the things that you're saying, the truth, and I want people to hear what's going on. Let's talk briefly about the Middle East, what's going on, the quote-unquote Arab Spring, which means that all the people who were sympathetic to us and had peace agreements with Israel get thrown out, and the Muslim Brotherhood takes over and threatens that if you don't keep, Egypt did this, by the way, if you don't keep sending money to us, the peace treaty with Israel is gone.
Actually, just yesterday, because of Israeli airstrikes against terrorists in Gaza, the Muslim Brotherhood said we're ripping up the peace treaty entirely. Okay?
In Egypt?
Yeah, with Israel.
Okay.
So this comes after a day after the New York Times had a front-page story saying that the Muslim Brotherhood was moderate and was going to keep all of its relations with Israel peaceful. I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood is a group that despises Jews, despises Christians, believes in the imposition, and they do it gradually under deception. They also operate, social humanitarian institutions as a means of legitimization, and they believe in gradual imposition, not like Al Qaeda, immediate. Okay, but they're very dangerous, and I've engaged. We started dialoguing with them. We're about to give them $3 billion in aid over the course of 10 years, and now they're taking over Egypt. They're going to take over Libya. They've taken over Tunisia. Tunisia used to be a secular, moderate Arab country, and now Rashid Ghannouchi, who has called for the killing of Jews and Americans, is now head of it, and he's been allowed to come to the United States twice already by Hillary Clinton, who has waived the terrorist ban on him coming into the U.S.
That's from Tunisia.
Yes.
Turkey also.
Turkey, Prime Minister Erdogan, who is Obama's best friend, apparently. And sources say that Obama talks to him 3 times a week. Erdogan is a Muslim Brotherhood Islamist. He has slowly dismantled Ataturk's. Greatest contribution that Kemal Ataturk did was to destroy the caliphate and make Turkey a modern, democratic, pluralist state. Erdogan is making it a Muslim Brotherhood state. And he has basically jailed any dissident. He has enforced Islamic laws in certain areas. And he has traded and helped Iran. A dangerous man, a dangerous government now. And the U.S. now thinks it's one of its best friends.
Wow. What about the situation? Let's shift over to Iran briefly, because Iran, it is now alleged, is getting the bomb. Everything we've seen, including, by the way, the United Nations themselves, not exactly a very pro-Israel or a very friendly to the West organization, even saying that they're very concerned about the fact that Iran is on the verge of getting the bomb. They don't even have a delivery system already, but now they're on the verge of getting the nuclear bomb, concerned about it, you know, the president spoke to AIPAC and said we got to tone down our rhetoric.
You know what? I was so disgusted because the first 2 years of this administration, they wasted saying, well, we're going to talk to them and do everything. They did nothing, okay? 2, sanctions will not work, okay?
Correct.
3, the notion that General Dempsey said that they're rational actors and they'll do nothing.
That was amazing.
That is the most unbelievably ridiculous statement I've ever heard. Ahmadinejad and his cohorts are human suicide bombers. They don't mind losing 1 million people if they could destroy Israel, okay? And the reality is Israel is in existential danger here. And this administration is doing everything it can to stop Israel from saving its own self, okay? And I can guarantee you this. Despite whatever the president said, he will never use the military option, and that's the only option that will save Israel or save the West, including the U.S. and Europe, from the specter of an Iranian nuclear holocaust.
Actually, France and Britain have both said recently that they would be willing to step in and bomb Iran if they needed to. They made that statement. And Israel, I can't believe that Israel would sit by and allow Iran to get the bomb. I know eventually they're going to have to do something if America doesn't act.
Well, as Barak, the defense minister, says, there's an immunity zone, right, at the point at which you can't act afterwards. Remember, the sites are dispersed over 28 different sites. They're underground. Israel only has 120 bombers. That's it. The U.S. has thousands, right? And Israel doesn't have refueling capability, doesn't have air flight capability. So it's going to be very difficult, right? 2, there are 80,000 missiles in Lebanon that can be trained on Israel, that would be used. Iran has intercontinental ballistic missiles. So Israel is not, look, a war is not a pretty situation. The Israeli Defense Ministry will be destroyed. That's been stated by the defense minister. The missiles that are trained on Israel can hit within 3 meters accuracy, and there are hundreds of thousands. So we're talking about a situation that is horrible, but the alternative is even worse. Because if Iran gets the bomb, then everybody else will become under the shadow of a nuclear Iran. 2, there'll be a nuclear arms race, and 3, ultimately it'll be used against Israel.
And other Arab countries, I understand, are more sympathetic to Israel, taking out...
Saudi Arabia has been pushing the U.S. to act and saying to Israel, move, 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 right? It's the Arab countries that are afraid of this, okay? Not anymore with the Muslim Brotherhood taking over Egypt and everything, and us recognizing the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, the fact is, the notion that the sanctions are going to suddenly act and deter Ahmadinejad from building a bomb is the most ludicrous notion in the world. This is not mad, mutual assured destruction that deterred the Soviets. These are not rational people.
You know, I mean, you know what you're saying. You know what you're really saying. You're saying that if Israel is forced to act and bomb in Iran and take out the nuclear capabilities, and you're saying 2 things. One, you're saying a lot of things. But you're saying, one, that they're going to have massive destruction in Iran, massive destruction in order to take out all of the capabilities. 2, that there's going to have to be massive destruction in Lebanon and elsewhere that have missiles trained on Israel.
Israel doesn't have the capability of fighting those fronts. It doesn't simply have. It has limited number of bunker buster bombs.
Right.
It cannot take on the Iron Dome system that the president touted, all that, right? It can only shoot down 100 or 200 missiles. It can't shoot down 80,000 missiles. These are Grad missiles that can hit Dimona, that can hit Tel Aviv. There'll be 10,000 Israeli dead. And the U.S. is saying to Israel, oh, don't worry, sanctions will work,
Right.
And the reality is, they're saying to Israel, well, if you bomb Iran, you'll turn the Iranian people against, you'll force them to ally themselves with Ahmadinejad. Well, the reality is, why wouldn't sanctions, which are hurting the Iranians, the dinar has been devalued by 80%. There are unemployment, food shortages. Why isn't those sanctions hurting, forcing the Iranian people to ally themselves? The reality is sanctions are not going to work. They've never worked in the history of mankind in forcing a regime to change its foreign policy.
Well, I'm going to ask a question a lot of people are afraid to ask, and that really is not supposed to be talked about, but what about the possibility of Israel using a nuclear bomb or more on Iran that would take out And also a small tactical nuclear weapons in Lebanon that would take out their capabilities. I mean, I know it's a radical thought, but what's the alternative?
I don't think they would do it, and I don't think it'll achieve the necessary goals, because remember, the missiles in Lebanon are all dispersed. So one nuclear bomb is going to take out 80,000 missiles. And number two, in Iran, they don't need a nuclear bomb. They need precise military equipment, some of which the U.S. had given in previous years, most of which they don't have. They're developing it their own. Mm-hmm. They also need to use EMP, electronic magnetic pulse, which will jam radar equipment. Okay, but in the end, the reality is Israel's going to suffer retaliatory consequences, and it's horrible.
We're nearing the end. I've got to ask you two quick questions. One, are you optimistic or pessimistic?
If I was really pessimistic, I'd move to San Diego and become a server.
Okay, all right. And are you appearing here that you want to talk about anywhere?
No, because then I'd have to have somebody else start my car.
Okay. All right. Listen, you can go to www.investigativeproject.org, all one word, investigativeproject.org, and check out Stephen Emerson. And he'll be back in May with his movie. I can guarantee you that. That will make it happen. Thank you for stopping. I appreciate it very much. Thank you, Elliot Karp, for making this happen. I appreciate it as well. And also thank you to Humana for hosting us. Come on down and bring your new or gently used clothes to help the vets. I'm Alan Stock. Have a great day. Drive carefully and always keep on thinking free.